This week, Facebook's F8 Developers Conference announces a dating service, Oculus Go, and watch parties.
Then Google's counterpart, called I/O, shows off Google AI and talking robots.
It's big tech making big moves.
Then, some of our favorite startups, unfortunately, are hitting the end of the road.
That's Future Forward for this week. I'm Steve Rosenbaum.
And I'm Gene DeRose. Let's launch.
And launch we shall. Gene, I got to tell you, I'm going to do an Ed Sullivan thing here, but I feel like we're going to have a really, really big show. Big show.
A lot to talk about. A lot to talk about.
But let's dive right in because I know you've got a passionate loving and a vicious hating this week. So claws at the ready. Love
right.
on, sir.
We'll launch into it. I'm realizing that it's my OCD that drives this. If one thing bothers me or I love about a service or a product in tech, that will dictate loving or hating. So with that, I'm loving Airbnb this week. It's partly because I've refamiliarized myself with a slew of trips the last 3 or 4 months for one daughter's coming back from freshman year of college and another one doing a few trips as she's a senior in high school. But what I love that I think is the anchor and the glue, they do lots of things well, is the reviews and the community that kind of exists alongside all the dialogue. We wouldn't dare stay in somebody else's house without the sort of assurances that these so-called trust metrics deliver to you. And Airbnb does a great job. They gently but firmly force you to do those reviews and make you feel like you're a schmuck if you don't. Do you use Airbnb much?
I do not, but I did not know the way you just described it made me feel a little more comfortable. Like maybe I ought to try it.
Yeah, and there are other options that they have, but it really works pretty well. So anyway, that's loving. What I'm hating, I am hating Hulu this week. And the reason I'm hating Hulu is they're just so second tier in quality on so many levels. Just in general, the interface and the smoothness in navigating around, and they're going against some very big, well-funded competition in Netflix and everything that comes off of the on-demand services and Amazon Prime. But what I hate more than anything is that they are a victim of their network television legacy owners. They are not so sure they even want you to use the service because they will force you to not accept the time shifting that is what works well. If any of you are familiar, you may turn on a Hulu old episode from FX or something. I've been trying to watch Legion, and you'll get a big message that says, warning, fast forward, rewind and pause may not work during this viewing, and it just kind of throws everything to the ashes.
Hold on. Let's just stop right there because I did not know that. That's appallingly terrible.
It's appallingly terrible, right?
Exactly. May not work. Like, golly, we're playing with you because we might screw the code or we might not.
Well, here's my analysis of the may is that they know exactly what will or won't work, but they would rather, for legal or visibility to partners reason, just say may. The reality is they will let you rewind. And what's wrong with rewinding? Because here's the second thing I hate about it that's connected to it is they force feed commercials on you in an awkward way. Now, that's, of course, a double sin because what do we love the time shifting of DVR more than anything for is you can fast forward through the commercials. Now, I don't begrudge them a little bit of 15-second commercial here and there, but they put you through a 2 to 3 minute station break grinder, A. And B, if you're watching for too long, it's like their software is getting a little annoyed and impatient because it'll unhandshake, send you back out to your TV and rehandshake you in, which brings us to sin number 3, which I've mentioned before about some other online services, is repeat ads. You will not just repeat ads, 3 ads in a row, identical in the same station break.
Yeah.
So that's a lot to say, but unfortunately, I'm stuck with it because there's things I want to watch there.
So we'll put a whole episode aside to talk about that decision because we got a lot to cover in the conferences. So I'm going to dive into F8.
Let's dive in. Yeah.
So F8 I thought was fascinating. You got to give Zuckerberg credit. what was it, 3 weeks ago, he was getting grilled by Congress,
Yep,
four maybe.
exactly. Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so they're planning this mea culpa. We got to go to Washington and say we're sorry, while they're also, obviously months into planning this great big F8 developer conference, which requires them to be forward thinking, optimistic, team oriented, partner oriented, and just totally upbeat. And so they announced a lot, and we're not going to have time to talk about all of it, but I thought there were some highlights. I'll share mine with you.
Yep,
The I'll tell you the one that maybe all the others pale in comparison to is dating.
yep.
Really? I would pay good money to have been in the room where somebody said, you know, live video didn't really work out because we had all those people killing each other on live television. We tried that. That kind of didn't work. It was horrible and had all kinds of issues. Let's do dating because that won't go bad.
I think it's a demographic issue. I think if Facebook has a weakness still, it's in that sort of 18 to 30-year-old would be Snapchat, user, notwithstanding Snapchat's kind of stumbling recently. And so I think that it's partly that. It's partly that I know some people that have tried to launch businesses around the Facebook API because the friends and the friends of friends, one of them was called Yenta actually. It was about trying to get your women friends to recommend dates for you from their network.
That's funny.
But it's a really good idea. But here's the problem with it, and I think they're going to run into a buzzsaw that's kind of typical of these things. You have to decide if you're the Match.com lifelong partner or the Tinder hookup thing. And those things are kind of, you can't conflate those too much because there's a little privacy, secrecy. I don't want to wear my Facebook public persona on my sleeve there. And I think that it's not going to work for them unless they figure out a way around that.
Do, do we know the answer to that? Are they going relationship or hookup, or we don't know?
I would say that they're probably going to ignore that as an issue and just try to put something out there that may or may not, fly one way or the other. I would think the relationship would be the way to go for them, but that's a thin business at the outset. And the thing we'll say, because some of us know other people that have been in this business a little bit, is there's a huge number of dating services that do very, very well. It's a
But they're all
bottomless
owned by
pit.
Barry Diller, right?
Well, he scoops a number of them up, but there's others out there, and so it's not look, to your point originally about Facebook, and we'll kind of move through this a little bit. This is a breath of fresh air for Zuckerberg and crew because they're on stage, but in a sort of developer B2B among their people mode. And so even if they had issues of privacy or data that might come up, this is about their developers, their media partners, their advertisers, and all the services companies, develop companies that work around them. And as we'll get to with Google in a second, a lot of the subtext of this is making themselves look attractive to tech and developer talent. A lot of it is that's a lot of the AI because there's not enough AI stuff that sits out there at the front end of the service of either of these quite yet. But there is a arms race going on in trying to burnish your reputation and attract and retain developer talent.
So let's talk about this Facebook Watch
Yeah.
collaborative viewing thing. So collaborative viewing has been on the verge of being a thing for as long as I can remember. Know a bunch of people that have thrown money at it. I guess my question is it a trend that's already happening that they're glomming onto, or do they think they can be the people to make kind of, I don't even know what they call it. It's not collaborative viewing, but it's
Yeah.
synchronous viewing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
do they
Well,
think,
right. Go on.
I mean, so using your focus group of two daughters, do they ever, say to their friends, let's watch this at the same time?
Well, yes, and to me, this is completely trying to capitalize on existing behavior. We've talked about this in past episodes. There's a kind of a low tech solution that drives a lot of things right now, and you got to remember that shared viewing doesn't work unless it's kind of live event. There's just too much time shifting going on to do shared viewing of the Americans or of Legion or something like that. But for a ball game, for the Oscars, for The Voice, for American Idol, for a lot of those, The Bachelor, those kind of shows, you need only to look at the what starts trending massively on Twitter to know that that shared dialogue is a big deal. Now, the low tech thing that's going on here is a lot of people, even the kids, they're texting. They're just rampantly texting, and they're in their little text user groups. And we're going to talk about groups in a second. And so I think these strategies by Facebook are a little bit overlapping. I'll also just finally just add, because we've talked about it before, the company I started about 12 years ago, House Party, largely built its business around shared television viewing parties. Sometimes
Yep.
it was sneak previews, but a lot of it has been Domino's sponsors the Oscar viewing party. So this is a big deal, and it's an underleveraged opportunity. I actually think that they're smart to go after it, but I don't know about how they're going to execute.
So anything else from F8, or should we get to Google? I mean, you know,
I think that we can kind of move on because we may loop back on them a little bit in terms of a few other things. I don't see enough in their AI stuff to sort of resonate, and we already talked about
yeah.
Oculus, so we'll come back to that.
All right. So which brings us now to Google's I/O. Interesting that they're so close together. They kind of step on each other a little bit.
They do.
Google's the thing that everyone talked about, and I don't know if you saw the video, I went and watched it, is this kind of almost human, slightly creepy voice recognition conversation where you say to Google, "Hey Google, make me a hair appointment," and it goes off, calls the hair salon, and has a conversation with the person booking your appointment, and they think they're talking to an assistant.
Right, right. And there have been some startups that have done pretty well so far, at least in the testing mode, with the virtual assistant stuff, because a lot of it hangs on things that you can touch and get tactile with in the digital social world, like your calendar setting and the timing and setting up calls and things like that. But I don't know beyond that. And I think that what's going on a little with Google in these announcements is they are totally at the cutting edge of a lot of front end technology evolution. They have to maintain their spot, but Google's kind of fishing for where the island is that's going to be their point of leverage. You know, Facebook has the Facebook service. Google, you know, you don't stay on your search for so long. You don't stay necessarily on YouTube so long and live in it in a community way. And so they've got that kind of issue. We're going to talk about photos too. And I think they're a little, you know, in some ways, hey, Google, the little assistant, voice activated, is the closest thing they have to a real home that we may live with.
I don't know. I I just find that there's a level of nuance that I think they're, at least in the demo that I saw, that they're choosing. So if I say, "Hey Google, I want to book my hair salon," book a haircut.
Sorry, I don't know how to help with that yet, but I'm trying to learn.
All right, this is so perfect because that was my "Hey Google" responding to you saying "Hey Google."
I assume that's what it was.
Let's leave it. We won't cut that out.
No. Well, so, "Hey Google, Gene wants to order some dinner."
No, not that time.
All right, never mind. It's not that
Look.
funny.
But I think you're onto something, and this is a problem with Siri as well. These things are not necessarily ready for prime time. You know, if the default is that they don't know the answer, or that they're going to send you off to like basically a voice-activated Google search, it just isn't very helpful. You know,
but the whole thing for me is, I would love to not have to call the eye doctor and schedule an appointment, but there's always this back and forth where they say, "Hey, can you update your insurance right now?" And I have to say, "Wait a minute, let me get my card," and then I have to
that's
read them the
right.
number. Like I just have trouble believing that they're like the world. Anyway, long and short of
No,
it
no,
is,
no. You're
I
right.
don't
Look,
I
the
don't
only
buy
thing
it.
that I would just throw in there is um, getting a dinner reservation might be the kind of thing that could work if already existing middlemen like OpenTable that let you do a dynamically generated, reservation, if you could kind of access those services seamlessly and go in and do it. But you're completely right. There's too many absurd steps in between for it to be realistic anytime soon.
I will tell you that I use OpenTable a lot. And if you were a computer scientist leaning over my shoulder trying to replicate the process, it's always this hybrid of neighborhood, cuisine, price, um, number of stars,
Yep.
availability at the time I want. And it's not a simple decision. That's a great restaurant, but they don't have the time I want. Do I want to wait the extra hour to go there? I have to look, anyway. So
I completely agree. I would just say baby steps in the sense that when I know I want to go eat at my local French place, I actually sometimes just use OpenTable for that.
yeah,
So almost accessing the service, even if it doesn't involve all those other features that the service has, is something that seems to me to have a little more opportunity. But I'll just the footnote to that is that like a lot of big players out there in their categories vertically, OpenTable has not done a good job at opening up their network to applications that could plug into it. So this is the world of tech. There's a lot of crazy chaos that involves competition that devalues things for consumers.
so what do you make of the Google Photo thing? I don't. I've been in and out of it, but I don't use it regularly.
I have a strong opinion. So um, I think you can't get caught between a rock and a hard place, and this is where Google has lived re-photos. And by that I mean you have on the one hand the social and sharing communities around photos, such as Instagram and the rest, and even social networks like Facebook and Twitter, where a lot of the action happens on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the cloud and the storage services and Google Drive, as well as Dropbox, as well as Box, in my opinion, have all failed miserably at presenting us with a reasonable way in which to share, to save and manage our photos, because they are a nightmare that gets jammed up on your phone in storage or goes to the desktop. And people that are not tech people don't even understand the difference between cloud and the rest. And when we have Google Drive and iCloud handshaking with our phones all the time, honestly, these photos get lost. So it's a little bit of a tragedy. Somebody's going to crack the code on that. I don't see Google doing it because I'm not sure they know how to go after it. I don't think they're going to have the guts to go after a new photo service and really pitch it for what it is. We'll see.
And I feel bad for a bunch of these guys because the one thing nobody says out loud is everyone wants to keep all their photos all the time. Meanwhile, the file sizes keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and I don't
Yep.
want to pay anything for it.
Yeah,
So
well, that's right. And the storage becomes a little bit of an issue. I'm amazed at even when my daughters were, early teens, they would just upload the 40 photos. They wouldn't even look at them, and share them privately. And so that's a little bit, we don't want to get out of this one without nodding sideways to whatever happened to Flickr, right? Because in a way, Marissa Mayer under Yahoo's relaunch of Flickr was a complete fall on deaf ears. It was a reasonable interface, but they didn't make a decision about where they were going with that question. Is this a social posting place, or should we store all your photos there? The problem is with consumers, you got to make a commitment to suck it up on the storage costs.
so
People are
so
not going to pay a few bucks a month for that until they see the value.
I was on Flickr the other day, and when there was something that had a tech problem or something, and it came up with this kind of quirky little, "Hey, buddy, are you having a tough time?" It was like some little
Little
blast from
assistant.
no, it was just words written in a different era.
Oh, that's
Like,
so funny.
and I
Right.
found
Right.
myself thinking, when Stuart and Katerina were there, the fact that that service had a voice was charming. But when they were gone, and then it was a floating ghost ship, like all of a sudden that voice is being written by some marketing person, and it made me think about whether or not startups that have community can really survive their founder roots. But
Well, we're going to talk about that in a way in a second with our Deadpool discussion, but I think
I
that
guess
you're
we
you're
are,
onto
yeah.
something. What are the assets? I want to just make one last nod before we depart from the photo, because it's a colossally important, you know, area and a big opportunity and a frustration, because in the world of iTunes and Spotify and Pandora, it's not our songs or our videos with Netflix and everything anymore that are taking up all the room. It's these photos, and they're very important to us. And remember Scott Heiferman, I wanted to just add also, before he even did Meetup, had a pretty successful photo storage business that was actually going after it in an interesting way. But this is prehistoric stuff. So Photolog, I believe it was called. But somebody's going to come out with something there, and I look forward to it.
All right. So Google I/O, Facebook F8, both good. New tech, groovy, but nothing. And then Oculus Go, which we raved about last week. So maybe
Right. These are PR events. Before we depart from it, let's just say it's not that something functional is happening. Facebook, people can't develop around Facebook anymore. So what are they doing? It's a little bit for advertisers, a little bit for talent. Let's get on and talk about failing startups.
Oh, hold on, but one more question, because I'm just seeing
Sure.
this thing and I'd forgotten to talk about it. And I guess maybe I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Google I/O got a lot of buzz for a Google Maps relaunch.
Yeah.
Love Google Maps. Don't like Apple Maps. Like Google Maps,
Right.
but I'm not sure what. I mean, I guess it's out, so maybe I'll play with it.
Well, look, I'll say this about Google Maps. It's ironic because I forgot to mention it. I would actually have more of a home at Google Maps if it was more user friendly and let me save things in a reasonable way. But they are afflicted by multiple masters syndrome, which is to say it's a little bit driven by advertising, it's a little bit driven by search stuff, a little too oppressively trying to push you to gas stations and restaurants and hotels nearby. These things need to use their AI to respond in a nuanced way to what the hell it is we're trying to do, and
All right.
I like building maps.
All right. So let's move on to the sadly named Deadpool section of the show. We haven't done one in a while, and I'm going to start with one that maybe I put in there unfairly, and that's Birchbox.
Why
I mean, they're
unfairly?
not dead. They're not dead yet,
Yeah.
but they're pretty
But they're
dead.
getting closer, and as you and I know, and probably some of our audience does, there used to be a very well-known site in .com1 called Fucked Company, F Company, and it was a big deal. It was a .com company startup version of Smoking Gun that noted. The reason I mention it is the layoffs that often led to the truly effed company. So it's important to track the demise of these things, because how they fail is as interesting and important as just that they fail.
So let's start with what Birchbox was, because I watched the founders present early on, thought it was really smart. They got into this business where there were all these little sample makeup and healthcare items, particularly focused on women, that were essentially being given to them for free, because sampling was a whole business, which they turned into a box. And the idea of the business was you'd get free samples, or I think there was a service, you paid them a fee
Yep.
to get this box of samples. And then the idea was you'd find this new thing you loved, this new cream or this new, coloring product, and you would then buy it from them.
Yeah, and it was aggressively priced for consumers too, because this was a kind of a sample play, and so it was a form of advertising for a lot of the product guys themselves. And Birchbox was the leader. They were at the forefront of a wave of dozens of startups in the second chapter of e-commerce. If the first was Amazon and .com, the second was 0508 10 socially powered commerce that returned things to selling physical things being an actual opportunity. But that whole category does not seem to have staying power. They're the equivalent of what catalogs used to be, right? They're middlemen. They don't produce the products. They're just trying to scrape some margin on the in-betweens.
So they raised a lot of money. They raised $90 million.
Yep.
And I don't know if the thesis changed, but at the point at which they found out that they could get people to pay them a fee for their box, but nobody was coming back to them to become a regular customer of the product because they just went to Amazon to buy it. Essentially, that $90 million all of a sudden got flushed down the toilet.
Look, this is the case. Other than Dollar Shave kinds of businesses that are inherently return and the subscription works. These businesses are fraught with lost customer issues. Even Blue Apron and some of the food guys struggle mightily against attrition over the course of 6 months or a year. And so something like this really feels like something that is very, very hard to maintain. And this might be the beginning of our seeing waves of companies that have something valuable to offer, but probably belong as a feature of another company or product rather than a standalone business unto themselves, which of course only leaves us with Amazon, but that's the nature of things right now.
So they tried to sell, the sale fell through. They were
Yep.
talking to QVC, that didn't work. They ended up getting $15 million in new money from Viking Global, who's already one of their investors. But in some very strange, I don't exactly understand it, they washed out everybody. I mean,
Yeah. No, it was.
maybe there's pennies left on the table, but
Well, I think
ze-
it was a recap, undoubtedly that reset the bar on everything, and you have to step back and put your whether you are one or have been one or not investment banker hat on and say, what are the assets that they have? If they're ascendant and they're a brand that's got customers and renewability, that is something. A company like this falls back on very little. Do they have great software? Do they have a great staff? Do they have a network, shelf space? They don't have those kinds of things. So I think it could be reset, but at a level for a modest second or third tier brand, which can be, it may be a 50 or $100 million business, but it's not going to be a $1 billion business.
so let's talk about cloud.
Let's talk about cloud. Cloud has had a slow, long slide into obsolescence. I did a lot of work in the last 10 years around so-called influencer marketing. That house party company, in some ways, used civilian influencers to help market products. But cloud introduced a wonderful concept, really 8 or 10 years ago at this point, a score for your social cloud. But they never really got it wedged in as something that we would all know. Hey, Steve, I know what your cloud score is. And it had to do with a lot of gray area stuff that tried to say it isn't just your followers on Twitter, it's some complicated algorithm of a bunch of things that add up to a slugging percentage. But classic social tools failure is, are you doing these things for companies, for individual people trying to make a buck, or for like consumer end users? What's the point? They never found a home for where that business sits. Did you
I
use it a lot?
I I remember checking my cloud score, but it was a long time ago, and to me, I never was totally sold that it was more than how many Twitter followers I
Yeah, yeah, right,
have.
exactly. And there's a couple other ways of looking at it. Look, in the time since cloud came and went, and I believe they had a big exit 3 or 4 years ago that failed, and so this is a kind of a second fade for them. The whole world of influencer marketing, which also is a little tulipy, overvalued and overwrought, but still is a powerful thing because in the world of social, we know that's the case. But the difference between an Omaha mom having influence that should be monetized and a Kardashian who mentions a shampoo is a big deal, but represents the continuum. So cloud didn't find a way to wedge itself into that space because there isn't a metric there, and there needs to be one. And it's the reason why that space has been a little wobbly, is until it has a kind of a CPM, advertisers never treat it as more than experimental. So they're representative of the space of influence and this world of the gig economy.
All right, last but not least, this weird Medium story.
Yeah.
You know, I, I just don't understand this. I really don't. Um, they abruptly canceled their membership program for the 21 remaining publishing partners they had. and I just found myself wondering, like, why did the, I mean, presuming they're not going out of business, and I don't think they are, why wouldn't they just handle things more with more, they Medium alternately promises to be the future of all revenue for all content creators, and then it moonwalks in and out of things seemingly randomly.
Yeah, I think it's important to step back and look at the roots of Medium. This is Ev Williams, who is the co-founder and really one of the two or three creative geniuses behind Twitter, luck or skill, but I think a lot of skill. And originally, it was a startup that was supposed to sit as against Twitter, not competitively, but a place for you to breathe a little more with what you were expressing and sharing as a publisher. Whether the intent was or not what I'm about to say, it has largely become a writer's forum and place to hang a shingle. So medium and long form writing, what used to be blog posts, to have them in a community and with easy to use common tools is a very powerful thing. And lots of people, me included, I love it. It's great. Some people just automatically now have a presence on Medium. Big publishers coming in and trying to establish a business, or medium-sized publishers, they've struggled with that. Because it doesn't, what is the there? And I would just challenge you or whomever, beyond writing, they haven't grabbed onto the other visual aspects to publishing and communicating, right? I find myself shortchanged when I want to put a graphic up, even though I love just the idea of, bold, italics, margins, bullets.
By the way, the picture can go flush left, but not flush right.
Yeah. Well,
really?
And some of that stuff is important to writerly kinds of people. I actually use it as much for a drafting area as anything else, which is kind of funny because it puts it over there next to like a Microsoft Word or a Google Docs.
I use Grammarly for drafting, which I love.
And I think in some ways Grammarly is a better, if narrower, tool. Even things like, you ever used the Tom Hanks thing that was a typewriter format? Writers tools is an interesting cut of the world, but it ain't in the $100 million and up company category. And I know some people that have been some of the pioneering, trailblazing publishers of vertical businesses that went on to Medium, and they just couldn't cut it. At its worst, it feels more like WordPress, if you know that world, which is to say it kind of has its own community, but it's also meant for you to put your own, shingle up.
Ding, ding, ding. We're out of time, my friend.
I know we could go on and on.
That was fun. That was a nice, we visited the current day, we visited the future, and then we visited the ghost of Christmas past.
Ghost of the past. I hope Medium survives.
And to that, have an excellent future forward week, and we'll catch up again next week.